Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show, and with me right now I've got a very special guest. He has worked in the wrestling business for so many years. He has worked for Pro Wrestling Stories as senior editor, he's the co-host of the podcast Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. He's also the producer of The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke.
Associate producer. Wrestling guy.
Yes. And also he's got a brand new book out. We're going to talk about it. Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. Pleased to welcome the one, the only, Evan Ginzburg to the show. Welcome, Evan.
Stanley. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into it. Tell me about where you're from. Talk about your childhood.
I am from East Flatbush, Brooklyn, as you could tell from my Brooklyn accent. If I go to California, inevitably they go, "You're from New York." They could tell by the accent. And I grew up in a tough neighborhood, East Flatbush, and I chronicle some of those tales in my new book, as well as my previous book, Apartment 4B, Like in Brooklyn. And to sum that scenario up, by the 70s, I was the only white kid in the block and one of the few in the school, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of that scenario.
Okay. So pretty interesting.
It had its challenges, and it also had its rewards, like any scenario. Unlike most older white guys my age, I'm not from the Led Zeppelin school. I'm more from the George Clinton, James Brown, Bobby Womack school. A different upbringing.
Well, you learn about so many different cultures, and there's a lot of diversity, and you're exposed to new things, and so being from that area, you learn so much about life and meet so many different people. Um, what can you tell me about, like, your first exposure or experiences with professional wrestling? Were you always a fan growing up?
No, I wasn't. It was a rainy, nasty day, and I was bored. I was a kid at home, and I'm turning the UHF dial. I don't think that exists anymore. And just looking for something to watch. This is pre-internet, pre-cell phone, pre-anything. And all of a sudden, there's this monstrous guy pounding on this American Indian. And I didn't even know what it was. It was pro wrestling, and that was Chief Jay Strongbow. And all of a sudden, he does this herky-jerky war dance, and he makes this amazing comeback. And I'm marking out. I didn't even know the term back then. And I think it's real, of course. I'm a kid. And I was hooked. I was hooked. And in 1974, I could tell you today, June 24, 1974, my dad takes me to Madison Square Garden, and I walk in the arena, and my first thought is, wow, it's in color, because we had a black and white TV. This is how long ago this was. And it was just amazing. The main event was Fred Blassie and Nikolai Volkov against Bruno Sammartino and Chief Jay Strongbow. And I'm a kid. And to me, this is Marvel superheroes and villains. Nikolai would come on TV and squeeze an apple with his bare hands, and it would explode. He was a powerhouse. And never in my, and the co-feature was the Valiant Brothers against Dean Ho and Tony Garea. And never in my wildest dreams would I imagine that decades later, I would be on the road rooming with Nikolai. I would be Johnny Valiant's shoot manager, booking him for appearances as an agent. I would be in Jimmy Valiant's Hall of Fame up at his wrestling school. It was surreal. It's like living your wildest
It's a
dreams.
full circle moment.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And unfortunately, in this business, there's also a lot of tragedies, and two of the three guys I just mentioned, Nikolai and Johnny, are gone. Jimmy's still with us. He's 80 years old, but a lot of loss in this business as well.
Yeah, so many legends have passed away, and but they all are always going to be remembered fondly for their contributions. And you had mentioned so many of the guys back in the day. Just being fascinated by these huge, Goliath, larger than life personalities going head to head with each other. Um, so incredible, being able to remember that, from years ago and to be able to work with them and be on the road and having to, sharing stories. That's a thrill of a lifetime.
I'm rooming with Nikolai one night, and in the morning he'd wake up and he would have these old school blocks that he carved with his own hand, and he would start the day with 300 push-ups on these old school blocks from the old country. And then he goes, Evan, let's arm wrestle. So I'm not, I'm 200 something pounds. I'm 6'2". I'm not a 98-pound weakling. I could not move that man 1 inch, not 1 inch. He was so powerful, even when he was older. So one of the stories I tell in my new book, we're on the road and we're on a shuttle bus. We worked the Hollywood Collectors Show, and the Sheik and Nikolai and all these legends are with us. So we're on the bus going back to the airport, and I see this woman staring at Nikolai. And she all of a sudden gets up the nerve and goes, "You're Nikolai Volkov." And he was the warmest, friendliest guy. Everybody loved Nikolai. Bret Hart, when Nikolai died, said, quote, "Nikolai Volkov is the nicest wrestler I've ever met." And Bret knew everybody. So to make a long story short, we're on this shuttle bus, and the woman recognizes Nikolai. And all of a sudden, Nikolai, who's super nice, says, "Let me introduce you to my partner, the Sheik." And there's the Iron Sheik. He looks exhausted. He's half asleep. He's much older. This is decades later. And the woman, just a fan, the woman on the shuttle bus goes, "You're not the Iron Sheik." And he like flips out. He's like, "You stupid jabroni." And all of a sudden she's running like in terror, you know. And this is the kind of stuff that happened on the road. These guys were colorful, larger than life.
It's so unbelievable. Gotta love Iron Sheik. Oh man, what a great. Um, so you're a fan since growing up since childhood. You how exactly did you get involved with like the entering the business?
What I learned is one thing always leads to another, or the cliche, you got to be in it to win it. So in 1990, I put out a wrestling newsletter, a sheet, pre-internet. It was called Wrestling Then and Now. That led me to doing radio, a wrestling radio segment on a 50,000 watt, very famous New York station, WBAI FM. And this was 3 in the morning. And from there, you're making all kinds of contacts. It's a 50,000 watt New York station. So I started doing agent work, booking these guys for appearances. And what, which led me to doing The Wrestler, because I had Nikolai and Johnny Valiant booked for an autograph signing. And the executive producer's best buddy, just walked up to us and approached us and said, my best friend, Scott Franklin, the executive producer, the money guy on The Wrestler, you guys would be perfect for this movie. We're working on a wrestling film. And next thing I knew, we were meeting with Darren Aronofsky, one of the greatest filmmakers alive today, and
Mhm.
I'm hired as the associate producer or quote unquote the wrestling guy. I was in charge of all the wrestling related stuff from Mickey's stunt double to Mickey's trainer to getting the ring to taking Aronofsky and crew on the road for 6 months prior to shooting because Aronofsky wanted it to ring true, and which it did ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an amazing movie. I remember getting to see that when it first came out with Mickey Rourke, and Marissa Tomei, Evan Rachel Wood. So many talented actors and actresses were in that film, documenting and capturing the life of a pro wrestler, um, just coming to life on screen. And so many other people were there too. R-Truth and Ernest the Cat Miller was in
I
that
brought our
film.
truth into the movie.
You
And I
did.
I did 5 or 6 casting calls on that film, and I brought in most of the wrestlers. Some of the wrestlers were brought in by Alpha. Some of them were Alpha's guys. Alpha ended up training Mickey. Um, so yeah, our truth was a pleasure to work with, and I I I brought in Romeo Roselli. He was in WWE. You know, a ton of the guys in the film. Andrew Anderson. All kinds of it was a great experience, the whole thing. So I'll tell you a quick story
Yeah.
that's also chronicled in the book. I have a whole chapter on the making of the wrestler because a lot of these stories were never in print. So I take Aronofsky to this convention in New Jersey, and along with Scott Franklin, along with the screenwriter Rob Siegel, other guys from the crew, and there's no fans there. There's like nobody there. And it's like the WWE Hall of Fame. There's Nikolai, Sheik, Tony Atlas, Lou Albano, Moolah, Mae Young. It's literally the WWE Hall of Fame, Johnny Valiant. There's nobody there. And Aronofsky, who was an 80s Hulkamania rock and wrestling era fan, he felt sad. He's a good guy. He's not. Aronofsky's mom was a New York City school teacher. He was a regular guy with a dream, not a rich kid. So anyway, so Aronofsky keeps going, Evan, where is everybody? Where are the fans? He didn't understand that sometimes it's like this. And the Iron Sheik's head was down on the table asleep. That's how sad this convention was. Next thing I know, and because I was helping with the wrestling end of the scripts, I wasn't writing it. I was, telling the screenwriter this
Yeah,
rings true, this
you're
doesn't.
trying to give him like, you know, basically implying this is what happens in the ring. This is what happens in professional
Yeah, for
wrestling.
example, I'll give you an example. In the original version of the script, Randy the Ram's blading himself and everybody's watching. And I said to the writer, nobody would be watching. It would be just another day at the office. Nobody would care. So that was taken out of the script. Next thing I know, this sad convention scene is written into the script. So jump ahead a few years. We're shooting that scene. A lot of the merchandise on the table is my stuff, ironically. I'm helping to set up, the set for that scene so it rings true. And Aronofsky gets this smirk, and all of a sudden he goes, Evan, come here. And I go, yeah. And he goes, I want you to walk up to Mickey last, ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid. All of a sudden I'm acting. I've never acted in my life. There's 125 or so people on set, these giant cameras, and I'm acting. How surreal this is. Mickey walks over to me, whispers in my ear. He goes, just improv it. He thinks I'm an actor. He goes, just improv it. I go, okay. So I do exactly what Aronofsky said. I walked around. I walked up to Mickey last, and the whole time I'm thinking, what am I going to say? And I go, I loved you as a kid. I saw you at the Garden, Madison Square Garden. Can I have your autograph? That's what I would say to a legend. So he looks at me and he's improving it and he goes, what's your name? And now I go, Evan. how surreal this is. I'm playing myself in a fictional movie. How utterly surreal this whole thing is. So Aronofsky comes over, he starts pounding me on the chest. He goes, that was great. That was great. Because I looked like a starstruck fan because I was nervous. I've never acted before. So jump ahead. Now the film is done. It's a year or so later. We're at the New York Film Festival, one of the most prestigious film festivals in the world. Lincoln Center, 2,300 people sold out. 40 bucks a ticket, sold out. Okay. And I'm in the audience with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She's looking at the scene comes on. I don't know if I made the final cut. I'm not the editor on this film. I'm not Aronofsky. So I'm watching, and all of a sudden, there I am. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, goes, she's looking at the screen. She's looking at me. She goes, that's you. That's you. How surreal this whole thing was, and how incredible the whole experience was. And later, I'm looking around, and there's that really poignant scene where Randy the Ram says to his daughter, I'm just a broken down piece of meat. And I look around me, and everybody's crying. Everybody's crying. And we had worked off and on for 7 years on this, off and on, 7 years from the time I met them to the time we shot it. And I knew right there, I knew, wow, this works. You can't fake crying. This works. And the movie ends. We get a spontaneous standing ovation. Walk outside, this paparazzi. They're taking, my picture. I'm like, this is really the best night of my life, the best night, the best experience. And I really treasure it. And a friend of mine said to me, Aronofsky putting you in this film was his gift to you because that'll be there forever. That'll be there after we're all gone. And his performance is so iconic. He won the Golden Globe and he was nominated for the Oscar. People will be watching this 200 years from now. And the whole thing was just a beautiful experience. And I write several pieces on the making of this in my new book, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards and Movie Sets. Where did I get the title? Because over the years I juggled wrestling, teaching, and filmmaking. So
Yeah, I mean that movie just has a lot of emotions in it, from the intro to the end of the film.
it
And of
rang
course,
true. It rang true. I said to Mickey after a screening, I said, what do you think? And he said, I can't look at it. It reminds me of my life. That's how true it rings. I mean, even for him. Yeah.
yeah, definitely a lot of, like I said, a lot of emotions. But there's a lot of scenes in there that are just inspiring and motivating, and definitely captures the art of wrestling, the sport of wrestling, and just all the pain and sacrifice that these men and women go
Well,
through.
people have no idea. We did a documentary called 350 Days, after the wrestler, and we interviewed 3 dozen plus wrestlers and the stars, Bret Hart, superstar Billy Graham, Greg Valentine. I don't want to bore you with the huge list, but these guys told us. Bret Hart said when he was WWF champion, now WWE, he wrestled 330 days a year. And Greg Valentine said he wrestled 320 days a year. And all the stars wrestled over 300 days a year. Think of what that does to your body, your family. And wrestlers hate the word fake because they go, my 3 divorces weren't fake. My, 17 surgeries and 5 concussions weren't fake or whatnot, and the pain I live in every day, my body hurts, when they get older. Wrestlers call it a bump card. You only have so many bumps on your bump card. And so they hate the word fake because they sacrificed to entertain us. And a lot of them did not make the huge money that some of these stars are making today.
A lot of wear and tear, and the travel schedule too is hectic. It's changed.
Exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, in recent years, though, I'd like to think it's changed somewhat with the reduced schedules and the TV
Oh, it's
deals and
better. It's
everything.
better. And the stars are making big money. Nikolai said to me he was so exhausted once, he fell asleep with his eyes open. He didn't know that was humanly possible. That's how exhausted. They would just crisscross the country every night. And it wasn't like they were looking out for them. You're in New York tonight and Philly tomorrow. Many times they were just crisscrossing the country. It was insane, the lives they had in the mid 80s, late 80s.
They'd have like a loop where they'd go to towns like New York, Philly,
Boston was the
Boston.
drive. Yeah.
Yeah, there'd be like a loop DC, that whole like Northeast area, and then sometimes they do like the Midwest, sometimes the South. It would change like constantly. They would constantly rotate in and out between crews, and sets of wrestlers would go to different towns. So it was a grind.
It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll for many of them, and a lot of them did not survive it. And wrestling is not for longevity. Two of my dear friends who are in the book and in 350 Days as well, Nikolai Volkov and Lanny Poffo, they were health nuts. They were very health conscious. They ate nothing, bad, and they took care of themselves and both, didn't live to a ripe old age. They were in smoke-filled arenas every night, different time zones, the travel, the wear and tear. It's not conducive to longevity. You could count the wrestlers in their 80s and 90s, on two hands probably. It's not a long list.
No. Thankfully, many of them are still with us and they're still able to, live healthy and great lives and still are, make appearances and keep, being there for the fans.
The ones who
And
survived it anyway. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely hard. It's definitely a hard life to
Brutal,
live.
brutal. And yeah, it's better today. I mean, it's still tough. And today the high spots and bumps that they're taking, that cuts short your career also. It's a different kind of abuse.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Do you keep up with the product at all? You
Oh
still
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm a AEW fan. I'm an indie fan. I was at Ring of Honor Final Battle. I was in the audience. I love Will Ospreay. I think he's the best in the world. Swerve Strickland, Kenny Omega, of course. In WWE, Gunther's very old school. He's great,
I
and
like him too.
guy's great. And I like Cody Rhodes very much. Roman Reigns on the right
Mhm.
night when it's not all about the shtick and the entrance, when he's in wrestling mode, he could be great. Charlotte Flair's great. Asuka.
Asuka.
I'm not one of these guys. There's been no good wrestling, since the territories. Some of these guys, that's not me. At the same time, I think the WWE ticket prices are obscene. Obscene. The last Garden card was 63 to 1,011 a ticket for a house show. That's not a pay-per-view. And you're pricing out a chunk of your working class blue collar audience. So I don't think that's great. I don't think it's great that a lot of wrestlers die needing GoFundMe's, and I think they should have taken care of these guys like the NFL does. They're a $1 billion corporation. There's a fund for old timers in the NFL. Not that they're benevolent either, but my point being, WWE's business practices, some of them I'm not a big fan of, but the wrestlers are great. And some of the way they present it is a little too cartoonish for me, WWE. But
The good thing, and I've said this before on other episodes, the great thing about today is that I think the wrestling business is in a healthier place with a lot of different alternatives, different companies, different, it's like ice cream, one flavor, another flavor here. If you like this, here's something for you. Whereas maybe 20, 25 years ago, we were lucky if we had maybe two companies, but there was like one company for many years. And now you have several, and a lot of them are on television. They've got TV deals. I mean, AEW is killing it on the Turner networks. WWE's going strong. You've got NWA still around and
Let me
TNA.
just say one thing though. It's deceptive. Just because somebody's on television doesn't mean they're making huge money. The stars in WWE and AEW are, but there's plenty of wrestling on TV, and some of these guys are not making big money or even making a living as a wrestler. There are guys who have figured it out, like Matt Cardona. He's making a good living, wrestling everywhere and anywhere. And yeah, guys like that, know the business and have the name recognition. But trust me, still on a local indie, these guys are getting paid nothing or 25, 50, $100. I mean, they're struggling.
Well, when you go to an indie show, who are some people that you enjoy watching and feel they could be big stars at some point in the near future?
Um, I like this gimmick. They're called Dirty Deeds. They're in the New York, New Jersey area. And it's an old school, like hillbilly like gimmick, but it's over. The fans love it. And interestingly, Chris Michaels, who worked in WWE, and he was an early ECW champion before Paul Heyman under Eddie Gilbert, when Eddie Gilbert was booking. He's 63 years old and he's wrestling. His two partners are much younger, but that's an interesting gimmick. And there's guys on the indies who really should be in WWE or AEW, like Homicide. Homicide never has a bad match. That guy's tremendous. And
Incredible.
oh, incredible. Yeah. Grim Reaper with GCW. He's top notch. There's a lot of indie guys out there. But it's tough. It's tough. And many times they're working in a wrestling school, they're training, they juggle things because the indie paydays can be lacking sometimes.
It's you gotta hustle, 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 work your butt off, and eventually at some point, hopefully you make it to one of the big promotions and just take off. I mean, just gotta keep on doing it.
And merchandise yourself. Sometimes you see these indie guys, they have no merch and they're just in and out and they do the gig and they get their pay and they leave or whatnot. I've seen local guys pulling in hundreds of bucks with merchandise if you have a packed crowd, and so they have to learn that side of the business too. And also self promotion because don't keep it a secret. Oh, by the way, I'm wrestling tonight. It's not promotion. They have to do better than that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Matt Cardona a bit ago. I mean, he's someone I feel like is a perfect example of somebody that really promoted himself to a high level, and a lot of people say he was like one of the first pro wrestlers to really use social media to his advantage because he became a huge star via, you know, X and social media.
Oh yeah, yeah. You have to use it today and market yourself and get a buzz and know what the promotions are looking for when you send in tapes and such and network and you never know. You see, some of the kids don't realize, when I say kids, the very young wrestlers, that guy sitting there, first row, could be major media, could be an agent, could be scouting. You don't know. So you shake hands with everybody, you introduce yourself to everybody, you have business cards, you have tapes of your work. It's a business. It's the wrestling business. It's show business. Just destroying your body and getting concussions and not taking it from point A to point B is not the way to go about things.
No, you have it's not only the stuff you do in the ring, but it's outside the ring too.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very tough. But I'll tell you, I've seen guys go from local little indies to superstardom. So Mick Foley. I used to see wrestle on indies back in the '80s, and he got a buzz on him, and next thing you knew, the guy blew up and was one of the biggest stars in the world and making good money. And you know, it's doable, but you need to be a total package. And that package includes marketing yourself and networking, not just, having the same body and same tattoos and the same shaved head and looking like every third guy. Yeah, it's a package. It's a
Yeah.
package. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your book, and how you were able to start kind of coming up with the idea for it, writing it. So I think this is a really fascinating book, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets.
Well, what happened was during COVID, they shut down everything I loved. Everything. The places I taught in, the gym I went to, the movie theater I'd go to, the restaurants I ate in. Everything I loved was shut down. I was even doing heel managing on the indies, and that went by the wayside also. And it was a very grim time. And I was basically in the epicenter, in Queens, New York. The airports all converge here, LaGuardia, Kennedy, and there were 800 people a day getting COVID, and five of my friends died. Five,
Oh
and
man, I'm so
I
sorry.
yeah, it was a terrible 3 years, and I basically said to myself, I have to throw myself into something constructive, or you know, I, I'm going to lose it. It was just a miserable period, and I started basically writing a piece a day, like a writer's lifestyle. Like instead of waking up and going to the gyms were closed for a long time. I would get up and just start writing. And what I did was in chronological order, tell my life story in 100 true stories. And a lot of these involved wrestling. And a lot of them sadly involved tragedies like the death of Tiger Khan, who worked for the Hearts, Melissa Coates, who was at my wedding. Um, she was in WWE's.
Developmental.
Yeah, she was in OVW, I believe, and she had some appearances on some of their pay-per-views, but they never fully signed her. Um, Nicole Bass was a dear friend. I was at her deathbed the night before. They pulled the plug the next morning. I was at the hospital. So I tell a lot of these stories, but it's not all grim. There's some funny stuff in there. On 9/11, 2003. I'm on a plane, 9/11. I was on a plane 2 years to the day with Johnny Valiant going from Philly to New York, one of these little 20-seater puddle jumpers. And the pilot looked like a bad guy in an action movie. He looked rough. He had a beard and he was an ugly guy. He didn't look like one of these clean-cut pilots that you usually see. And Johnny Valiant's looking at me, and I'm looking at Johnny, and Johnny whispers, "Did you see this guy? Did you see this guy?" We're thinking it's a terrorist. So we're on this plane and it's hitting turbulence. You feel everything. It's a little tiny plane with 20 people on it. And we're looking at each other like, are we going down, Johnny? Is this plane going down? So obviously it didn't, because I'm here talking about it. But there's some humor in the book as well, some funny stories, and but yeah, I basically told my life in 100 quote unquote vignettes, and you really get to know some of these people on a personal level. There's pieces on Johnny, Jimmy Valiant, Nikolai, Iron Sheik, Nicole Bass, Melissa Coates, Lanny Poffo, Bruno Sammartino, Killer Kowalski. I mean, I poured my heart out because most of them are gone. Here's a funny story that's in there.
Yeah.
Greg Valentine is a dear friend. He'd sleep on my couch when he was in town. We'd book him for autograph appearances and such. So Greg, I live in an apartment. Greg walks out of my building with me. All of a sudden, we hear this car just screech. You hear the tires screech. Guy runs out of the car and goes, "You're Greg Valentine." And, and Greg goes, yes, I am. You know, so he's stopping traffic at 870, whatever, you know. So there's some funny stories in there like that. But yeah, it's been the good, the bad, and the ugly, the joy and pain of all of this, being involved in wrestling and filmmaking and teaching and juggling it all and making it work. It's
Yeah.
we like I said, the wrestler took 7 years. I got paid 7 years later. The bills are still coming in. So you always juggled everything, and that's what
Yeah.
the book's about.
Yeah, I mean, you're able to bring back, basically bring these stories of the people that, unfortunately are no longer with us back to life by telling these stories about, the good times that you shared with them and the making of the wrestler and just being just present for so many moments that are just so unforgettable.
Oh yeah, I have a piece in there. I was at Madison Square Garden the night that Jimmy Snuka leapt off the cage on Don Morocco. I was at that. So
Ooh.
Mick Foley was in the audience as a teenager also. We're pretty close in age. So Snuka climbs the cage. I'm looking at my best buddy Scott Birdstein, and I'm like, no, he's not going to do this, is he? And he then we realize he is going to do it, and he leaps up first. He's leaping up before he lands, and this is again pre-cell phone. A million flash cubes go off. Flash
Mm.
cubes. And I tell people it was the most exciting moment I ever saw in pro wrestling. Not the greatest match I ever saw, but the most exciting moment. And it's just like there forever because the YouTube video has been seen by millions and millions of people.
Yeah, it's
And
viral.
it's an iconic moment. I write about that in the book. And I was at many iconic moments. I was there when Dynamite Kid wrestled Tiger Mask at the Garden, and this was a super heavyweight territory. And these guys, it was like they were coming from another planet. We never saw anything like it. We didn't know what hit us, like our mouths were open. We're used to these big lumbering 300-pound guys wrestling Bruno or Backlund or Hogan, and it was amazing. I was at some very legendary um, events like Dynamite Kid. I'll tell you a crazy story that's in the book. Um, December 8, 1980, Bruno wrestles Sergeant Slaughter in the main event. It was a rare card that Backlund wasn't defending his belt. I walk out of the garden along with 20 or so thousand other people, and there's a really weird vibe in the air. Something just feels wrong outside the garden, and people are murmuring. They're like whispering to each other. I walked up to an absolute stranger and I said, quote, "What happened?" Guy looks at me and he goes, "John Lennon was shot." Yeah, it was that night and it had just happened.
Hmm.
And there was, again, no internet, no cell phones, no nothing. And by the time I got home, we learned that he had died. And that was wrestling night at the Garden, ironically. So
Wow.
I tell that story in the book. Yeah, so a
So
lot of the book
heartbreaking.
it's not just wrestling. It's,
It's
human
life.
interest and life and death, unfortunately, and tragedies and then, there's some, really inspirational stuff in there too. And it's 100 stories. And I wrote it pretty much all during COVID, except I added a piece on Lanny Poffo, who died after the fact, because he was such a dear friend.
Yeah, it's another one that we've lost too soon. Oh man.
And
Um,
let me just say something. That genius gimmick was not a gimmick. He had an encyclopedic memory. He remembered epic poems. not just the stuff he wrote. I mean, famous poems and show tunes, lyrics to songs. He really was an eclectic, brilliant guy.
He
And
was very intelligent.
oh yeah, oh yeah, you could talk to him about anything. And when you devote your life to pro wrestling, sometimes you don't want to talk about pro wrestling. We would talk about theater and film, and he was very well read. And when he was on the road, he would like visit Edgar Allan Poe's gravesite. He was not like your typical jock. You know what I'm saying? He was an interesting, eclectic guy, and we miss him terribly.
Very well rounded.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. He acted in movies. I'll tell you another funny wrestler story.
Yeah.
So I bring in Lanny to meet with Aronofsky to do a reading. And Aronofsky says to me, Evan, I like him. He's such a good guy, but he looks too healthy. He looks too healthy. That's not what we're trying to put across here, you know? And another funny story. One night, Aronofsky has me be the point man. We're meeting Nicolas Cage. We can't get the money to, we can't get the funding on Mickey's name at the time. We were trying to get 18 million, and which is not a lot of money. It's an indie film, and so at the time, 2007 or so, 2006, Nicolas Cage was top box office. So he says, we're going to meet him in the parking lot at the Hammerstein Ballroom. There was a Ring of Honor card that night. So he goes, get him inside the dressing room without the paparazzi bothering him. So we're in the parking lot, and I'm meeting him. And part of me is like marking out because at the time the guy's a huge movie star. And then I notice, for whatever reason, I notice his shoes and I go, they're just another pair of shoes like any other guy. He's just another guy, you know, you know. And he was so nice and so warm, that, after the initial, wow, this guy's a big deal, it was just two guys talking the rest of the night. So I'm backstage with him, and he says to me, I'll never forget it. We're watching, Ring of Honor, and he says to me, "Is this real, like UFC?" I go, no, 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 Nick. It's wrestling. I mean, it's hard hitting, but it's not quote unquote real. It's predetermined. So after the fact, I'm sitting at Aronofsky's office, and Darren goes, Evan, Mickey's the right guy. Mickey looks the part. Mickey looked like he had been to hell and back. Mickey was top box office, movie box office in the 80s. Sex symbol. He was in Diner, 8.5 weeks, big movies. And he leaves to get punched in the face boxing. This is not a normal career trajectory for a leading man in Hollywood. Okay? So, shoot ahead 20, 30 years. We're working on this in the early 2000s to mid 2000s to late 2000s, 7 years basically, 2001 to 2008. And Mickey doesn't look like he did in 1985. And Darren's like, he's the right guy. So he's a real filmmaker. He goes with his heart, with his gut. If you're thinking box office, you're going to go with Nick Cage at the time. And I respect that. I just respect that. And anything I've ever worked on, it's not about the money. You just want to do quality work that'll last. We're very proud of 350 Days. Prior to that, I did a movie on pennies. It's called Wrestling Then and Now, Killer Kowalski, Nikolai, Don Arnold, and we shot that like on nothing, but it's from the heart, and with today's many platforms, it's on Tubi, it's on Plex, it lives forever. And most of my friends in that movie are dead. So it keeps them alive in a sense. I don't mean the lesser names in the movie, a lot of the indie guys who are gone now, they're forever in that film, and it's that's a beautiful thing, and why you quote unquote create art.
Yeah. And it's keeping their legacies alive or telling their stories, and it's going to provide memories that will continue to last a lifetime. So it's amazing, that you've been involved with so many different projects. I want to talk about, you talked about your teaching career. What made you decide to get involved with that?
Huh. This is interesting, and you're a young guy, so you may learn from this. In college, I was a creative writing major, and the professors would all say, it's very hard to make a living writing. Get a teaching license. Okay. On the one hand, that's good advice because you could always make a living teaching. On the other hand, I would not discourage young people from following their muse, doing what they want to do, what they were meant to do. And even Aronofsky, he always wanted to be a filmmaker. And his first film, he basically borrowed 500, $1,000 from everybody he knew, maybe even less than that. He did a movie called Pi, and it was PI 3.14. It's about a math genius, shot in black and white on nothing, and it put him on the map. He knew what he wanted to do, and he did it. So part of me regrets that I didn't go all out to be a writer early on. And part of me's like, teaching for the most part has been wonderful. Teaching adults anyway. Teaching kids was rough, but teaching adults is a pleasure. And so I don't regret it. And to this day, having taught for decades, I'll bump into students on the street, former students on the trains, on the buses, and they'll say, I got my GED because of you. I went to college because of you. I got a career. I feed my family, and that's a great feeling. There's an old quote: "Teachers affect eternity." It's like ripples in a stream. Those students who provided for their family, their kids are going to go on and do good things with their lives, and so it's very rewarding also, and there's no shame in. I have a piece. This is an interesting. I have a piece in there. This one wrestling website guy, who will remain nameless. He said to me once, "You're not a success in wrestling because I never made a fortune in pro wrestling." And his idea of success is different than mine. He could review Raw and SmackDown till he turns blue. We made the wrestler. To me, create art, create art. So to throw out like nasty comments like you're not a success because you didn't make a fortune in pro wrestling, it's a very limited tunnel vision of the world. And the world is bigger than wrestling scoops and dirt and minutia.
Yeah, I mean, we're a podcast that is devoted to, giving back and paying it forward and doing good for others. It's more than just about the stuff, the bumps and bruises that these men and women take in the ring. We're showing the human side and the element to.
Respect. You don't need another podcast that reviews Raw and SmackDown. It's done to death. People watched it already. Why do you need to agonize over every angle, every result?
Yeah, I mean, it's being able to make a difference in someone's life. There's no greater feeling, like you said. It is rewarding because you have people that come up to you, that remember you, and it really does make your day whenever you see someone that tells you that you made a difference in their life.
And sometimes you don't even realize the effect that you have on people. I just put this book out a week ago. Somebody told me already they were inspired by what they've read, and they're writing a book about their family and going to wrestling and what it meant to them as a kid. Because there's legions of people. This is what I say all the time. Some of the best nights of our lives were going to wrestling with our parents or grandparents or whoever it was, aunts, uncles. Why? Because they're gone now. They're gone now. My dad died when I was 20. So when I think of some of the best
So
nights of my
sad.
life, it was going with him to wrestling. So it transcends just matches. They're really meaningful experiences. So my dad was a World War II veteran, and we're at Madison Square Garden, and there's Waldo von Erich playing a Nazi, Baron von Raschke playing a Nazi, and you have this blue collar crowd. And this isn't a smartened up internet crowd. These people, for the most part, believed, so there's real heat in there. There's the Nazi characters beating Bruno up or beating Pedro Morales up, and the fans want to murder these guys. And back then, there were actual riots. They had a riot in Madison Square Garden. Dick the Bruiser started a riot where they didn't let kids in for like 30 years. You had to be 14 and over because they were worried the crazy fans would riot because we believed. And there's a story in the book also. I'm getting older, I'm a teenager, and people are telling me outside the garden, they're going, Superstar Billy Graham is going to beat Bruno for the belt April 30th, 1977. And I'm like, no, no, no. Because, in other words, it's a work, it's not real. So, and it happened exactly like they said it. It happened. And then you realize, wow, this is a work. And you love it on a different level, in a different way. It almost didn't matter. I tell people seeing heel Roddy Piper mid-80s, he would come out at the Garden, whether in a singles match or with Cowboy Bob Orton, Randy Orton's dad. And it was such chaos and violence and blood that when the match was over, you actually went like you could breathe again. Like you couldn't breathe. It was so exciting for that 10, 12, 15, 20 minutes. It was insane. They had a match with Roddy Piper and Dr. D. David Schultz against Snooker and Andre the Giant, where Andre the Giant lost, and he never lost back then. Piper bloodies up Andre the Giant, and they carried him out on a stretcher. It was, and you're sitting there, and like your mind is blown. Like heel Piper, mid '80s. It was the unbelievable, unbelievable. And I tell people some of the best nights of my life were going to wrestling, and what happened, honestly, by the late 80s, Vince had gone full kiddie show, full circus. And I pretty much stopped going to WWE and I started going to Philly for the NWA. And you had on top Flair and the Horsemen. Then you had the Road Warriors, Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, the Russians. Mid card, you had superstar Billy Graham and Jimmy Valiant, who would headline in WWF. These guys were mid card. It was so loaded, the NWA that era. And they would have war games, and Flair was magnificent. Forget the fanboys with, oh, every Flair match is the same. That's bull. Come on. Flair, when he wrestled a Ricky Steamboat, was a different match than when he brawled with Terry Funk. I was at the I Quit match, the legendary I Quit match. That was
Ooh.
amazing. Flair and Ricky Steamboat was the greatest match I ever saw live. And then you would have Flair against the big muscle guys like Nikita Koloff and Lex Luger. That was not the same match as Flair and Harley Race. This is a fanboy myth that they perpetrate. Sure, the guy's out there 30, 45 minutes, an hour. You're going to see some of the same moves, but don't tell me it was the same match because I was there and they weren't. That's you know,
Yeah.
spin.
Well, I want to talk more about your teaching
Sure.
career. What has been your favorite part about teaching students?
Interestingly, I will teach a class of adult English second language students, and sometimes in that room, you have 15 or 20 different nationalities, different religions, different cultures, people whose countries are enemies, you know, and Russian and Ukrainian students sitting next to each other, friends, getting along, and Muslim students, Christian students, Buddhist, Jewish, every possible mix, and everybody's friends, friends. They get along. And we sometimes we'll talk. Religion is variations on a theme. You visit your family, you bring gifts, you feast or you fast. You eat a lot of food or you eat no food. You pray to somebody. Why we all kill each other over this is insane, insane. And if you look throughout history, the number one cause of war has been religion. I have friends who are incredibly religious. I have friends who are atheist leaders. And you know what? They get along. They get along. You know, don't force your views on other people, and everything will be okay. And I my Achilles heel is xenophobia. I can't. I just don't like it, and I won't get into a whole political thing because inevitably you alienate half of your audience. But let me just put it this way. Immigrants built this country. If you go back far enough, your parents or grandparents or great grandparents were immigrants. My grandfather was a kosher butcher. One day, criminals came into the shop, robbed him, locked him in a freezer,
Mhm.
and he was literally dying, freezing to death in there until finally a customer came in and he's yelling, "Get me out, get me out." And the guy opened the door and freed him. My grandmother worked in a factory 100 years ago in New York, sewing, making clothing, and the needle on the sewing machine went through her hand and basically crippled her hand. And you know, immigrants were always used as cheap labor, and they paid their dues mightily, and they encouraged their children, the next generation, go to college, have a better life, an easier life. And 100 years later, my grandmother sat in an English second language class in New York, and I'm teaching English second language classes to adults in New York. And it'll always be the same and it'll never change. I don't have a lot of Japanese students. Why? Because the economy is always good, so they don't need to leave. People leave their country, leave their families, leave their friends, leave their culture for hopefully a better life. My own wife is Korean. She worked doing nails in Korean nail salons and now is a home health attendant. You're not going to get rich doing that. But if you don't have, excellent English skills, it's tough out there. So, English second language classes are important and funding for them and, community organizations that have them. It's very important. And, giving back to the community, teaching, in organizations like this, volunteering. There's a lot of beautiful people out there. You turn on the news and there's nothing but a barrage of bad news. But there are people. I have people in my building. I have a 93-year-old woman who devotes herself to helping stray animals. Really, My wife and I have two rescue kittens that were living under a car, freezing. One of their siblings had part of a tail ripped off, sleeping in a car engine. And we adopted these two kittens and we love them. So there's people out there doing that kind of work. And I encourage people, we love these cats like babies, and give a loving home to a stray animal, cat, dog, rabbit, whatever it may be. Um, I had a house rabbit years ago. Lovely pet, very social. People don't realize.
How long have you
So,
had it?
yeah, so, you know, give back, whatever it is,
Well, why do you feel passionate about giving back to your community?
because my father never broke 25 grand. He was a New York City yellow taxi driver. And we moved, when we moved, our rent tripled from Brooklyn to Queens, 1974. And it was a struggle for him. And I know. And even as a teacher, my first year teaching, I made 8,000 a year my first year teaching. It's a long time ago, but still. Um, the point being, a lot of people struggle, and a lot of people, I know people that work full time and still go to food banks. It's tough out there. The average rent in Queens, New York is 2,900 a month. Do the math. You're looking at 35,000 a year just in rent. So that becomes a two-income household. One person can't do that unless they're making really good money. That's average 2,900. That means half is higher. So there's a lot of people struggling in the world, and I know people who were once homeless who are now doing very well. You know, people pull themselves out of bad situations, and so, give back any way you can, any way you can. And I like to contribute to GoFundMe's for indie artists and things like that because a lot of the projects are done on a shoestring and or they can't get done because they just don't have the money. There's a movie called Once. It's a beautiful indie film about street musicians in Europe, and they shot it on 120 grand, which is nothing, full-length feature. And they won the Oscar that year. I think it was 2007, if I'm not mistaken. They won the Oscar for Best Song. And the actors, who are also the singers, they play musicians in the movie because they're real musicians. They said in front of billions of people, they said, create art. Create art. And it's another way to change the world, really. And follow your muse, follow your passion, help people. I'm much older than you. When you get older, what you realize, what's really important, friends and family. Friends and family, not how big your house is, how expensive your car is. You don't see me dripping in jewelry or anything. What's real? I got my Bruno Sammartino shirt on. You know, I'm not I'm not looking to impress anybody. What you really find is important, friends, family, following your muse, helping people, finding some degree of spirituality, which doesn't have to be religion. I practice Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, peace of mind, and helping people. When you help somebody, when you give somebody a gift, when you give somebody a Christmas present, birthday present, whatever it is, it actually lets off hormones, endorphins, like you're at the gym and you feel good. You feel good helping people. And that's what's really important.
Well, I think that this has been great, talking about, the importance of giving back and the stuff that you're doing to help out in your community is wonderful. I'm so happy that you've been able to make a difference in your community by teaching students for so long. Before we
34 years just to get
34
help.
years.
Just English second language. 34 years.
It's amazing. Before we wrap things up real quick, let's talk about your podcast. You co-host Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. How'd you get involved with that?
Also during COVID. During COVID. Buddy Sotelo, who was an indie heel wrestler out in California, we were buddies online, and he's very tech savvy. I'm not. And he's like, why don't we do a podcast once a week? Even if it's just for ourselves, just to have a schedule during COVID. It was like you would go run errands twice a week masked. It was horrible. So, and Dr. Mike Lano is also one of the co-hosts, and we've done over 250 episodes at this point, once a week, and going back years now. And also, what we've found is over those years, some of our guests have passed away. So those hour-long interviews are like a living memorial to them because some of them were indie guys. They weren't hugely famous, and not everybody was doing hour interviews with them. And so again, even if you don't have a mass audience, we're not busted open or whatnot. But those shows where you're interviewing people who are now gone become meaningful. I'll give you one example. J.J. Maguire. J.J. Maguire was a dear friend of mine, and he did music with Jimmy Hart, most of those legendary entrance themes. And he was a great guy, very talented, and guy was fit. He goes to sleep and he dies. I was stunned. I had just spoken to him a few days before that. So there's an hour interview. There's not tons of hour interviews with J.J. Maguire out there. So for his friends, family, fans, that's there forever for whoever it would be meaningful for. And again, that's why you throw yourself into projects like this. And I nothing but respect for you, because instead of just obsessing over wrestling, you're talking about helping the community and giving back to the world. That makes your show more meaningful than 95% of the shows out there. Just because a show has a bigger audience doesn't mean anything. If you affect whoever and help change lives, I have a buddy who helps homeless people get settled. He helps them find shelter. I mean, that's not an easy gig either. I mean, there are people out there who are good people.
Well, Evan, I just want to say thank you so much again for coming on to the show. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube.
Anytime.
Where can people find out more about you and what you do and your podcast with Buddy, Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast? And how can people buy the book?
Well, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards and Movie Sets, you can get it on Amazon. Paperback, Kindle, ebook, the whole deal. And it's the #1 trending new wrestling release on Amazon. So very proud of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. We have a Facebook page, Evan Ginzburg's Old School Wrestling Memories on Facebook. Yeah, we're not hard to find. Check out 350 Days on Amazon. It's from the heart, really from the heart. These guys just pour their guts out. Superstar Billy Graham and Bret Hart, we bill as the stars, but there's 36 legends, and about half of them are gone at this point. The movie came out about 6 years ago. Wrestling Then and Now, Killer Kowalski, Nikolai, Don Arnold, myself, many others. And we're going to have other book projects, other film projects later this year. So, connect with me. And we're working on a book on John Tolos, the Maniac
Oh.
Tolos. He was one of my childhood heroes, one of the greatest heels of all time. He came into Madison Square Garden to wrestle Bruno, and he's cutting one of the great promo guys of all time. And he goes, "That's Spaghetti Bender. Spaghetti Bender." This was like hot stuff in the 70s,
Yeah, yeah.
So He was great, John Tolos. And why are we doing this book? Because we love the guy. You're not going to sell 1 million John Tolos books. He's dead 15 or so years. A chunk of his fan base are dead at this point, but we just want to honor him. That's why you do things.
Keep that legacy going. We'll invite you back for a part two. We'll get you on again the next time you put something out. But again, I just want to say thank you very much, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Thank you so much. I'd be honored. Thank you. Appreciate the support.
Absolutely. Take care.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.